All right, so we are here with Mr. Tony Gardner, the intrepid leader over at Alterian, and we are here to talk about you and your team's work for Studio 66. Fun movie.
666.
Oh, sorry, did I say Studio 6? Studio 666. I saw it this weekend. It is so much fun, Tony.
You enjoy it?
I really did. My wife and I went. We saw it on a big screen. And it's
cool.
bloody, hilarious, great kills.
No, thanks.
Congrats. Let's start out with, how did you get involved with the movie, Tony?
Oh, God. Dave Grohl actually came up to me and said, hey, do you have a list of ways you might want to kill people that nobody's ever let you do before? And my response was, well, yes, as a matter of fact, I do. He had been recording in a big mansion that is out in Encino, where he had actually stayed when he had his house renovated. And then when they were doing their 10th album, he rented it out and they recorded there. But it's like this big, weird, creepy old house. And they kept saying, what if this place was haunted? And, started making up stories and stuff. And I'd work with him a couple times, starting with the Run music video where we did them all old, and had like 2 weeks to do it. So it was pull everything you have out of a box. And thank you, RBFX, for supplementing us. But so I've known him for a while. So it was a very casual sort of shorthand. And he asked if I had this list, this list of deaths, basically. And he asked me to put it together. And he had like a page and a half of a story. And I think I had like 2.5 pages of deaths. And then from there, he hired a writer. And their agenda was to merge these two documents and create something out of them. There's only so many members in the band, though, to kill, so we got to step outside of that a little bit, which was fun, but there's still enough stuff on that list for a sequel, for sure. But it was fun having already life cast them for the music video, knowing who's going to be the most tolerant of life casting and prosthetics and all that kind of stuff. And Rami Jaffee, the keyboard player, was great during the life casting thing. We're like, are you up for like a full body and all that? And he said yes. And I said, okay, well, I have this death in mind that we would need somebody to basically be naked for, and it'd be very bloody. And he's like, I'm in. And so it was great. And because they were already available, even though the script wasn't written, we had access to the talent. And we were able to like sort of get right into it. And so Rami, the sequence that I'm talking about was written with Rami in mind, and that he would be the character. So the story had to fit. It's either he's the guy with his family and it's, somebody else, or in this instance, he's the Romeo and it's the lady next door, who happened to be Whitney Cummings. And involved a lot of life casting and a lot of pneumatics and a lot of hoses and a lot of blood. And we storyboarded it so that everybody understood what we were doing. BJ McDonnell was hired as the director, and he's done tons of camera stuff on genre projects. And then he directed a trilogy of Slayer videos that we did a bunch of gore on. So he knew our language, so it was really easy working with him. But the idea for that scene in particular, it was kind of my sort of riff on the old 80s movies where the promiscuous teenagers go off to have sex and meet up a horrible death, But I wanted to one-up an arrow coming out of Kevin Bacon's neck and go a little further. See how far I could go, basically, with the knowledge that with comedy you can really push stuff. So it's so extreme. Well, you saw it, I mean, it's like there's more blood in that scene than in both their bodies combined. It's just everywhere in the room. It's on the ceilings. It's on the walls. It was on the floor about an inch deep. It was just, how far can we push it? And fortunately, Dave and BJ like let us go for it, and we went and basically sliced a guy and a girl in half this way while they're having sex on a bed. So I don't know what this says about me or my childhood or my psyche, but I thought it would be fun.
It was that there's so many great kills, and I want to do a speed round and talk to you about how you pulled each one of them off. But that was the piece de resistance. That was unbelievable. I want to back up just a little bit because I noticed a lot of great nods to some classic horror films. I mean, there's the riff on the Necronomicon from Evil Dead.
Uh-huh.
You've got The Exorcist with Dave's unending vomit. What were some other horror references that were thrown out there in the early discussions?
The Exorcist came up quite a few times, and there's actually a scene showing the front of the house with the delivery guy standing at the bottom of the stairs. That's sort of an homage to that as well. But let's see, Burnt Offerings. This is all old stuff, you know? Burnt Offerings, The Exorcist.
Krug.
Oh,
Krug.
yeah.
Friday, so Nightmare on Elm Street.
Right, but I'm drawing a blank.
Friday the 13th. I'll help you. Friday the 13th, clearly.
Yeah. The whole bed exploding in blood thing was part of that whole idea, you know. It was Amityville Horror. Dave kept referencing Amityville Horror as a film that really scared him a lot when he was a kid, watching it growing up. And it was sort of this guy's descent into madness. And because it was sort of real, that really impacted him. So I think in the story and in the script, there was the goal of trying to fit that sort of descent into madness kind of into everything that we were doing. But there's a lot of comedy stuff too. There, you know, there's riffs on a lot of stuff, and I think that just comes from the fact that BJ, the director, is a big horror fan, you know, and his wife Adrienne is a makeup effects artist. So they take in a lot of this stuff just as part of their daily diet. So BJ had a lot to reference too. And then we also referenced some of the stuff that we had done on some of the Slayer music videos, in particular the decapitation. But that's another one where it's like, how much blood can you pack into a human body, and how high a pressure can you put it on, and still have it visible on screen and not vaporize? It's like, okay, that's a good, you know, recipe.
Finding the sweet spot. Let's backtrack to where it all starts, and that's with Dave's. It actually, I feel like Krug's death is where things start turning bad, and that's when he gets electrocuted. So let's just start there.
Yeah,
and then Dave, I want to talk about Dave's possession. So let's talk first about Krug getting electrocuted. How did you pull that effect off?
Good old fashioned, you know, good old fashioned makeup effects. Just a lot of talking some guy into gyrating on the ground in a smoke machine and progressive layers of prosthetic makeup on the guy. We were able to swap him out and use somebody else for the body shots while we were upping his makeup.
Now, were you sticking with foam, with silicone, with transfers, or a combination of all of them for his look? What was it comprised of?
He is, when he's killed, it's all silicone. It's all silicone. There's a couple transfer pieces, a couple like raised veins and stuff like that. But it's mostly out of the kit stuff and some Baldy sheets. Tom Flouts wrangled Krug's burn makeup, and he had Baldy sheets flying everywhere.
It's very effective. Add a little smoke, add a little writhing.
Yeah.
Perfect electrocution effect.
Yeah.
It's then when the thing really starts turning, and it starts with this wonderful nightmare sequence after Krug's death. And it's the first time we see the shadow creatures. and they disembowel Dave. So can you talk about pulling off that sequence?
Sure. The idea was that was an American Werewolf in London inspired thing, basically, where it was like a dream within a dream. He has this weird dream, and then he wakes up and he's okay, and then he lays back down, and something else happens right away, and he's still in the dream basically. But the idea was he gets gutted by a bunch of zombies that climb over the top of the bed while the shadow people are standing around him, and he's in this black void. And it's old school Shaun of the Dead, sort of, fake torso, the guy under the table. We've done the same thing on the Blob. And then the fake torso is packed full of stuff, and everybody had to just pull it all out. We had the lights down really strong on the bed, so the red really kicked in the intestines. And if you look really close, the zombie on camera left, right next to him, that's me. So I got to, we got to write it, and then we got a guy named Vilmore Cruz who used to work at Alterian to storyboard it, and then some of us got to, be in it. So that was fun.
Oh, fantastic! You got to make a cameo. Is this
you got to be a zombie? Yeah.
Yeah. Is this something you frequently do, Tony?
Usually it's like my severed head. There's a joke that my severed head should have an IMDb page because it's been in so many movies, and given my hook nose, it's fairly easy to spot. But I feel like almost every B movie we've been in, my head or my dead body's been in for sure. And then my body's in the original Zombieland, and I mean, it just shows up wherever. So
that's so cool. A little Easter egg in any Tony Gardner, in any Alterian film. Look for Tony. All right, let's move forward and talk about once Dave's possession happens, he kind of shifts between his look and then his possessed look. Obviously, upper and lower fangs. What else went into pulling off his possession look?
Well, it's kind of funny because Dave can't really look mad, like to save his life. Like he can look like a little angry, but he can't look like super mean. He's just not wired that way, nor does he seem to be built that way. So he's actually wearing a prosthetic forehead with punched brows. Denise Bear actually punched some brows on him to give a more of an angry look, but it's sculpted, at the classic like 45-degree angle thing, because we couldn't get that expression out of him.
So interesting. Dave Grohl cannot frown. Wow.
He couldn't like scowl and look mean, not to save his life. So we added that, and then contact lenses, and then it was just paint makeup on his face. Beyond that, slightly chapped lips. Again, a little nod to the Exorcist kind of thing. And then the fangs, the upper and lowers. And there were 2 stages of those based on how mad he was or how possessed he was. And when it gets to the point where he's at the pool, then all these little carvings kind of come into play on his face, into the brow piece, and then on his real cheeks. And that mirrors what's on the altar that's in the basement of the house.
Oh, that I got to rewatch and look for that detail. So who led that up, and also who created those dental prosthetics for you?
The teeth were Chris Lyons from Fangs Effects, who consistently does amazing work. And then the contact lenses were Dr. Gording. Sean Kinney was the on-set lens tech. The prosthetic, I roughed it out, and I forgot who finished it. It might have been Lilo Tavo. And then Lilo did all the little transfer pieces for the wound markings. When I did the test makeup, we did a photo shoot for Mondo magazine, I think, at the same time, minus the really crazy stuff. And he actually looks a little more like a vampire there, but they didn't want to give away any of the possession stuff. And then it's his own hair and just a little bit of stuff added in his hair. That's really it. We had hands with claws, we ended up sort of switching gears, and the shadow people end up having the longer fingers with the claws instead. Um, Again, it started to feel a little too vampire-y, so I'm trying to push that back. But before Krug dies in the control room, there's a scene where you're looking through the wires behind the console at him, and there's a hand that kind of goes like this down the wires, and it that was prosthetics and that black, like ultra black paint, so it doesn't reflect any light, so it almost looked like a shadow in real light. But that was an homage to Alien, where the hand when she's in the pod in the end. That was a little riff on that. Like there's something in there, but you don't quite know what it is.
That's a great transition since you brought up the shadow people. Let's talk about them. They're very unique. There's got to be some VFX augmentation for the glowing eyes and mouths. Why don't you talk me through how you guys pulled those off and any nods to any VFX?
Okay. The hands for any close-ups were all prosthetics, so that there was more dexterity and they could stay super skinny. A lot of the full body shots, they're actually gloves. They're wearing black unitards that cover their face and their whole body. And then they're actually wearing a vacuform mask that has lights in it. And Eric Beck did this system where we could control the intensity of the light in the eyes based on how the scene was lit or how far away they were and stuff like that. So that version didn't have any sort of like mouth lighting to it. It was all just the eyes. And then we did a puppet head of a shadow person with the mouth partially open. And then we did sort of like this blob sort of thing where the jaw distends really big and gets really long. And we had all this nerny stuff, like this tendony stuff in between the upper and lower jaw. So when it stretched, that stuff stretched out and got thinner, and you'd see more light behind it. We had a little light panel in the puppet head, so we could do that. And then the puppet had narrower eyes that we could push even further if we wanted to. But it was a head that could move around, and then we could film that and then digitally comp that onto the bodies if they decided that they wanted to see mouths opening, or you could just comp this much of it on, but it gave them another element to play with.
So as far as you know, most of what we saw on the when their mouths were opening was actually your practical puppet
right.
being comped on.
Right.
So, very cool.
Yeah. Most of the time when they're standing in the background, it's the mask with the character's wig on it. Or in the case of Alex, he was bald. But there was an effort made to sort of match them all up with what they looked like as the band in the beginning. You see at least two of them die. Jenna Ortega gets the hammer, and Alex gets his jaw sort of twisted open. So there's like a tall, skinny, bald shadow person, and then there's one that's Jenna size. And they're wearing black versions of their same clothing over top of the black unitard. So there's sort of a match to it. And then a wig that matches their human version. So.
Well, I'm surprised at how much was just in camera, actually.
Yeah. Most of the whole movie.
Say again?
Most of the whole movie was old school in-camera stuff, People think that close-up shot of Ronnie splitting is digital. And it's like, no, that was the same body. It wasn't even like a separate head. It was the same body that came apart in the wide shot. There was only one. It wasn't like a huge budgeted film,
Well, it just goes to show you old school is still the best.
Yeah. And I think the actors really appreciated it too.
Yeah.
So,
there was, speaking of practical, that raccoon puppet is what we're going to talk about next. That disemboweled raccoon, how did you guys build that thing? It had to come to life, and I'm glad it did at the end there, or towards later in the film.
They debated how it was going to come to life and what it was going to do, and then they decided that it would just be in Dave's mind and just be like doing this weird screaming. And it was a animatronic puppet that Peter Schiavocco had built. From the head up, the body was posable. And then Tom Flouts actually sculpted, molded, and painted the organs inside the body. And if you look really close, there's a marking on the lungs that matches the markings on the wall around it, that matches the markings on Dave's face. So there was an attempt made to kind of overlap a lot of this stuff. When Dave does the yarn design, it's a sort of a riff on the same thing. Ends up on the center of his forehead. So there's an effort being made, even though it's like a fun band movie that just happens to be a horror movie. There's an effort made to like keep stuff overlapping and moving forward. Well, there was actually a whole idea of shooting all the security camera stuff of the house and them leaking it before the movie came out. We filmed it in secrecy and nobody knew that they were doing it, and we were going to leak the security. David had actually started doing interviews talking about, we filmed in this house and I think it's haunted, and we made this little doll of him that was, going to sit on a couch and the head was going to turn after everybody left the room. All that went to hell when the pandemic hit. We shut down, and all that wacky advertising promo stuff kind of went away.
Oh, so the movie was already in the can. You just couldn't release it and couldn't finish this promotional idea.
It was mostly in the can, except for almost all of our stuff. We'd pushed all the makeup effects to the last week so that we could have as much time as possible. So the weekend prior to our last week of shooting, we got the call, you need to come empty out your trailer, we're shutting down. So all that stuff went back to Alterian and literally sat on all the tables. It took up all the table space. Rami's body, Whitney's body, everything was just up on the tables, and it sat there for, I don't know, 5 or 6 months before we were able to go back and shoot that week's worth of work. But because of COVID protocol then at the time, that 5-day shoot turned into almost 3 weeks because of the hours and the distancing and all that kind of stuff. And added, it was already a low budget movie, and added probably at least another fifth of the budget back on top of it.
Wow, that's right. Because you went back in 5 or 6 months after lockdown. It was still really tight.
Yeah. But that was the majority of our stuff. I mean,
yeah,
we had done like Krug's burn, Carrie King's body, and the Shadow People hands, and a lot of the smaller stuff. But we'd saved the big stuff to that last week. Plus, we needed to build a room out in the driveway for Rami and Whitney's death because we couldn't ruin the room that they were in. And, so that was going to be the last day of the whole shoot. That was going to be the sort of grand finale. And then it all went on hold forever. Well,
in some ways, I'm sure the wait, or at least the extra time, allowed you to really nail those scenes and shoot them well, because they really just come off so great. All the deaths.
Thanks. It was more challenging trying to get everybody back to shoot it after,
Yeah.
To be honest.
Before we get into the band deaths, which are so funny, I want to ask you about the vomit rig you used for Dave when he vomits out Shifty, who then turns into the murderer.
Right. Okay. So the vomit rig wasn't us. The vomit rig was the special effects department.
Okay.
And there were different people in charge of it at different times. But they had a rig that then digitally they'd comp Dave over top of. I mean, most of the digital or visual effects are old school,
compositing.
Yeah, I mean, even the ghost things like flying around, which was Raiders of the Lost Ark or Poltergeist, they were little heads with long fabric tails shot in a water tank. And then they were comped in. It's like nothing was built digitally. It was all just compositing imagery. So it was definitely an old 80s horror film.
So it was real vomit shooting comped over Dave's face. Because I was looking, because the thing Dick Smith created for Linda Blair,
Right. Yeah.
it had this very low profile sort of
Right.
prosthetic that would hide the tubes. And I'm looking at it and I'm going,
Yeah.
I can't see anything being hidden there.
I should be claiming that right now as our tubing rig. So
yes, you should
it could be really impressive.
Yeah.
But no, they wanted to experiment with the quantities of the stream and how much.
Yeah.
And if it repeats and how far is too silly and stuff like that. So it was just guys doing different sequences of things and filming it.
Well, it's really great, and just the sheer volume of puke, that's just fantastic. All right, we're gonna do a speed round of deaths. First death, we get a great head smash death in that opening flashback scene. How did you guys pull that off? It's very brief, but it is very effective.
We built a dummy head of Jenna Ortega and just let Marty Matulis pound on it with a hammer.
There you go.
So gross, dude. The eyes literally shot out, and it was disgusting.
Oh, okay. We already talked about Krug's electrocution. Let's talk about Will Forte, the delivery guy. His beheading by head shears or whatever those were.
Yeah, that was another one of those how far can we push this moments. And the body's just packed full of hoses. We figured it's night. You're not going to see much of the blood spray, so one more excuse to go big, right? It was a silicone loose jointed body with the head connected on a magnet, and then the head actually had a little ram sticking out into the stump of the neck, and we could launch the head probably like 15 feet if we wanted to. It was ridiculous, But the cool thing was, once you pulled the pin on the bottom of the body, the whole body would collapse backwards on itself, on its knees, and its arms would just kind of like flop forward. So we trial and errored it a few times in the parking lot here, just with water, just to make sure everything worked. And we have some really great slow-mo stuff that we're going to have to find first and then share with somebody.
Satisfying decapitation.
He was such a good sport too.
Poor guy. He just wanted to give him his demo. That's all.
Yeah. And pass out that ranch dressing. And
you can never have too much ranch dressing.
At the premiere, they had one of those big fountains that they usually put chocolate in. It was ranch dressing.
No.
It was so gross.
Nasty. No. All right. Speaking of gross food, Chris Shifty's death by grill. Let's talk.
Yeah.
Pull that sequence off.
It's ultimate old school. Latex nurnies glued to the grill, glued to his face, some prosthetics on his face, and then a likeness head of him with the same stuff added to that. Pretty straight up. And the back was a whole rig with like 6 or 7 areas where blood could spurt when the knife went into it.
And as his face is pressing up against the hot grill, what did you have under there? Just a light effect?
It was just, light and smoke. That was it.
It was great. Nurnies.
For those kids out there that don't know what nurnies are, that's when you take latex and paint it on a table and then add some baby powder to it after it's dry and kind of roll it up and make stringy, veiny sort of things out of it. So we had all these little sort of like latex bacon strips that we glued to his face, and then we glued to the grill, and he just kind of had to sit there while we glued it to the grill. And then on action, he'd, pull his head up. And if they snapped off, it's not like it really mattered. It just looks gross.
Nurnies are the all-purpose FX gag. They're easy to make, and they work for everything from guts to burning faces. The best.
To shit hanging out of Will Forte's neck when his body lands.
Yep.
It's all good.
We're going to backtrack, although you mentioned quite a bit, Rami's death. I do want to ask you about what the bodies were made of. Were those silicone bodies? Were they foam? Were they a combo? What did you make those bodies out of?
They were all silicone. Rami's body was on a fiberglass core so that it could weigh less because it had to do so much more. And it's like urethane foam from the base of the neck up inside the head, and it's all pre-scored, and there's a mechanism and stuff like that. And then everything is surfaced with silicone. So it was pretty hefty, and then we had all the mechanics in it too. Peter and Eric did a whole pneumatic rig to operate the splitting and then the falling apart of the body, and then Ralis Khan did these massive like blood explosions, and in a line down the base of the bed, that were where the bulk of the stuff from the 55-gallon drums came out from, and they were packed with chunks of stuff on top of the liquid being filled to the top to be ready to blow. So there was literally, like, as the chainsaw went past, there'd be like an explosion of stuff, and then the blood spray. So
how many times did you have to do that, or was it a one and done?
I think we did it twice, actually.
Okay.
But the second time you couldn't really show the walls or anything, because it was literally everywhere. I mean, it was dripping off the ceiling, and we had to kind of wait for the ceiling to stop dripping to do take number two. But take number two, we didn't clean up. We caught it all like mid run, so it wasn't like everything had to go back to zero. We just had to clean off a little bit of it.
I have to say, it's one of the more memorable deaths I've ever seen in my life. It was worth it, man. So good.
And Dave picked the song, which I thought was pretty brilliant, with the chainsaw sounds in the song. He's like, "Oh, Whitney has to ask for that. Like, it's her favorite song. And then we can, rev up the real one, and it's just part of the music. And then all of a sudden it comes out." That was a little chest burstery kind of moment there with the chainsaw coming out of her head. Her head was all silicone, and it was scored so that everything would stay tight just in that mouth area. And then the rest of her body was like a loose jointed body. Fun fact, Whitney's body was actually a sex doll that Whitney had purchased for her podcast that she had lying around and didn't need anymore. So Whitney donated her body to the cause, and we just replaced everything from like the collarbone up and did that part of it.
Oh, that opens up a whole other string of questions.
Literally.
Why would you need a sex doll for a podcast? It's an audio thing. You don't even see.
Yeah, she does it on camera, and
okay.
But she also had a comedy special, and she used it in the comedy special.
Okay.
Where she had, I think, Real Doll Company like make a doll of her, and then actually she took the doll, I think, from the waist up. I think she took it out on stage with her and talked to it, and did stuff with it. Which I believe was pretty hilarious. So, but after the run of all that stuff, it's like, what do you do with it? So we cut it in half.
Oh, it was a fitting end to that. That doll went out with style. There's Pat's death by van.
Yeah, I think Pat was the one that actually came up with the idea that it would be funny for us to both kill each other accidentally. So then we did the Pat getting run over by the van that Nate was trying to hotwire. Pat's thing was pretty straightforward. A Pat-sized body that was loose jointed. So when the car actually went over it for real, it would thump around. It had the proper weight and stuff. And then the head was a silicone skin over rigid foam core, and that was packed full of shredded urethane. And bits of like shredded silicone. So it might be something that would spend a little more time in the air. Mm-hmm. And then it was packed full of blood. And then we had a nozzle that went to a pressure tank, and it was all primed. So the blood was like, at the base of his head, which was already full of blood. So when the wheel hit it, special effects had put some squibs in the head to help it go. We had pre-scored it just with the X-Acto blade, just literally all over the place, and you really can't see it. And it was really more about timing. And we did it twice so that we could get the wheel and the explosion closer in real time together. And then the body's just laying there. And Nate, we wanted to show the wire going to his eye in like extreme close up. So we did this oversized section of his face. The eyeball's probably like this big, so that we could actually take a steel rod that was on a camera slide and slide it accurately into a teeny tiny hole in the middle of this eyeball. Everything was mounted to a base. There was the section of Nate's head. There was the slider that had the metal pole on it. And then the last minute we decided to weave some extra smaller wires down the length of it, sort of like a bike cable would have, just so that when it hits the eye, something could compress and you could see that stuff. And then we cut out of that, and it's Nate with some blood on his eye, doing a fantastic job, acting like his eye hurts. And then actually when Barb Weems stabs underneath his chin, we had a rig inside his hair to make the blood come down his face. Mm-hmm. She stabs under the chin, and then the point of the knife comes out the top of his head, and blood runs down his forehead and into his face, and then he falls out of shot. We made a little skull cap with blood tubing on it that had hair on that he could literally put on over his own hair. It was like, everything was all about speed all the time. How fast could we go? And then they didn't want to see the knife go all the way through because it wasn't that long. But I think in post, they decided to add the tip of the knife actually piercing out of the top of Nate's head before he goes over. So that was a VFX shot. And I don't know who did it.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. We will give them some love in the article, and hopefully they will claim credit in the comments. That wraps up the deaths, and that wraps the interview up pretty much. But Tony, I just wanted to just overall, this was back to just nitty gritty, all in camera, blood fest. Overall, how would you encapsulate this experience for you and your team?
Well, for me personally, it was 100% an 80s flashback, from the approaches to what we were referencing. It's exactly what we would have done back in the mid 80s when we were doing the Blob and stuff like that. I mean, we did the Blob on top of Marty when he stands up at the pool.
Yes.
I mean, It was literally, being a lot older now, there's a lot more stuff to pull from, but it was really sort of like, what's in the old bag of tricks, and trying to always tip the hat to the 80s while doing this stuff. The lack of budget usually means you have to be more creative, and in this instance, it was definitely true.
Well, as a viewer, the experience was that as well. It reminded me of the best slasher, gore, horror of the 80s. So many great gags, so many creative kills. And I love the fact that you were there at the very beginning of development with Dave with his little page and a half of story, and you with 2.5 pages of kill ideas. And it's clear that as much emphasis was put on story as on the kills in this film. It really showed you guys off very, very well.
Thanks.
So
and we were lucky to have BJ too, who knows this stuff, directing all of it. And he knows lighting and all that. All those layers go together to make something succeed. We were very lucky to have a great crew.
I hope that a lot of young effects people get inspired to go crazy with blood and great kills based on this film, because you did an awesome job.
Thanks,
so thank you for taking the time to talk to us about the movie. Studio
Anytime.
666, not Studio 66. That would be totally different.
Thanks, dude.
Thank you.